Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Julie Griffin, and I'm a Working Genius Certified Facilitator, and I am so excited to be here with you today with three of my fellow certified facilitators. And we are just so excited to talk to you about all things Working Genius. So if you guys want to come on out, then we will get y'all introduced and the party rolling. Real quick, hi, Dale, Kyle, and Jay. Thank you guys for being here. Hey, Denise is in the comments. Thanks for being here, Denise. She's another certified facilitator. If you guys are watching, anybody who's out there watching, please drop a comment and let us know that you're here, because that's how we know. We have a little eyeball that tells us people are watching, but unless you drop a comment, we don't know. So we are streaming to 3 of my platforms, I think at least 1 of Dale's and 2 of Kyle and Jay's. So we are out there everywhere. So drop a comment and let us know you're here. So with that being said, I just want to kind of go around the horn and let you guys introduce yourselves and just tell us who you are, what you do, and where you are, because I know we are distributed all across the country. So Dale, we will start with you.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, everyone. My name is Dale McIntyre. I'm in Rochester, New York. About 2 years ago, I took an assessment for Working Genius, and it explained a lot of things and set me off on creating my own business for greater purpose, and I help organizations get healthy.
Very good. I love that. Next, we're going to go with Jay, because Jay comes before K.
Well, I don't know how loud it is, but they are right by my window right now.
It's all right.
So we could do this, but so my name is Jay Scott. I was certified about 4 months ago, but I first found the 6 Working Geniuses back in late 2020, and really started using it ever since. Was really almost immediately started implementing it where I was at the time, and started off. Left where I was working back last year and working on starting a business. And this is something that I think is incredibly important. So it's one of the tools.
Very good. I love it. Thanks for being here. And Kyle.
I am Kyle Vernon. I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I have been certified since December, but I've been a junkie for well over a year. I found the 6 types of Working Genius actually at the gym. Is where I found it. I told myself that I was only going to get 1% better by listening to leadership podcasts while exercising. And after I exhausted a lot of resources and fell onto the table group, I eventually got over to Working Geniuses and started implementing it at my job then in the corporate world previously. But I love it. I can't quit talking about it. I'm sure my wife's tired of hearing about it, but it's great.
Very good. I think people around me probably feel the same way. I am coming up on my 1-year anniversary of being certified, and I use it through my position at Meridian Technology Center here in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So I'm kind of different from the other 3. Yes, Chris, Julie cannot stop talking about it either. Everywhere I go, every conversation, it's like, how can I relate this back to Working Genius? So I love that we are all across the country, and the 3 of you are really on the entrepreneur side, working your own business and using Working Genius in that area, whereas I'm within an organization. So I think that gives us a cool difference of perspectives, which is neat, especially when visiting with different people. So with that being said, I want to start with Dale, because he is the most seasoned out of all of us. But just take a couple minutes and tell us about some of the practical applications of 6 types of Working Genius, and what are some of the impacts that you've seen?
Sure. I think one of the most interesting parts of Working Genius to me, I was a Lencioni junkie as well, and 5 dysfunctions of a team was on my radar and part of my story of how I eventually launched my own business. So I looked at Working Genius, and for those who know that pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid is vulnerability-based trust, and the level just above it is conflict. People, a lot of teams avoid conflict, and I saw Working Genius play right into that. And of the clients that I've had that have deployed this technology, you watch people lose the guilt and judgment that comes. Some of the key messages that come out early, and they say, oh, that's why this happens, or that's why we have these issues. And all of a sudden the hair starts to get let down just a little bit. People start to relax, and you can start looking at things a little bit more intentionally and deliberately, and say, how do we do this better now that we know this is the way we're wired and this is the way it happens? So that to me is one of the most powerful things, because as we all know, if you don't have trust on a team, that team is likely to get less work done than they should. And in fact, they're dysfunctional at that level. They're probably not going to be successful in the long run.
Very true. Very good. And I love how the overlap of 5 dysfunctions of a team and even ideal team player and 6 types of working genius all intersect. I mean, I think the more I get into doing it and more conversations I have, the more I see that. So I love that you're able to bring those two together as well.
Absolutely.
So, Jay, what are some of the practical applications that you've seen so far?
For me, it was very personal. So when I first started it, at the time I was, so I'm Wonder and Invention, and at the time I was, I want to say about 100. I had created about 100 different tools, processes, procedures, ways to help the organization. Probably 5 to 10% of them had taken off, but that to me felt like failure because I wanted 100% of them to take off. And so there was a bit of frustration, and Dale just mentioned like guilt and judgment, right? So there was a lot of guilt that came to me, kind of feeling like we have so many things that would make this place better if we just took the first step and started building that momentum to incorporating these things. And not many of them were really gaining traction. So when it first came out, I had been reading a lot of Lencioni stuff before and was really kind of familiar with a lot of that, and entre leadership stuff too. So he showed up in a conversation with Dave Ramsey, and that's how I caught it. I think I took the test immediately and found out that I was Wonder and Invention, and that my frustrations are galvanizing and tenacity. And it all just made sense. It just became clear all of a sudden now, okay, I get it. I am not a galvanizer. I have the ideas. They're good ideas. I'm pretty high in discernment too. Like these are great things that we can do, but I kind of don't know how to get it to the next step. So then it became part of our vernacular too. And then we would always kind of joke around about needing galvanizers and needing people to kind of start moving things. And within a year after it, we gained some pretty good traction. So
Awesome. Very good. Kyle, how about you?
Well, Dale mentioned vulnerability, and I have to admit that is where this started for me. I drug my feet on taking the test because I just knew by listening to it that I was going to have the gift of enablement. And in a sales culture, to have a people leader with the gift of enablement, an enabler, right? That's how it's labeled in society a lot. It was pretty terrifying to go to my people leader and say, hey, guess what? One of your top leaders is an enabler. Let's talk about this. When do I have to leave the department? Like it was really eye-opening, and it took a long time for me to finally approach him with this information. But what I found out with having the genius of galvanizing enablement, he had those as frustrations. My frustrations were WI, Wonder and Invention. And so we had the reverse with frustrations and geniuses. And it was a perfect opportunity to have a really transparent conversation about how we could work better together. And that's exactly what this tool is. Like, it is an inclusion tool. It's a how do we work together to be better, to deliver the best product. And it allowed us to totally reshape our thinking on who was delivering what message, who was going to have the crucial conversations, who is going to come up with the data to back it? Because that's all I need. I need a little bit with galvanizing to believe in something, to go and rally the troops, to arrange the right people, get them in the right room. Like, there is nothing more exciting about that for me. I just don't. I love it. You know, you talk about Jay, and he probably is thinking, man, I'd be happy to hand that over to you at this point. And that's the cool thing about it. Pat Lencioni talks about it all the time. When one man's trash is another person's treasure, and that is spot on with this opportunity that I had with my previous employer, now taking this out to public and hopefully and bringing it to lots of organizations. So it was a great opportunity. Proof was in the pudding there. I'm excited to bring it to more people.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that comment too, Denise. I think that did take a lot of courage to take that to somebody and be like, hey, here's what I noticed and here's the impacts that it can have. Let's have a conversation about it. And I think that's one of the great things that Working Genius does, is it gives us the language to be able to have those conversations. So as they were talking about the practical applications and impacts that they have experienced, it just dawned on me that some of you watching may not understand what the 6 types of Working Genius are, or even know what the 6 are. If you'll notice in our names, we have 2 initials. So like I have Julie Griffin, EI, which stands for Enablement and Invention, are my geniuses. Dale's are Discernment and Galvanizing, Jay, Wonder and Invention, and Kyle, Galvanizing and Enablement. We're missing T, which for those of you who understand Working Genius, that probably is not a huge surprise that we don't have any T within our group. But I will say it's my number 3, so it's pretty high. So with that being said, I do want to give a quick overview of what the 6 are so that you know what they are. And when I get done, I'll let the guys jump in. And if I missed anything or if they have something else to offer based on the lens of their genius, then I would 100% welcome you to do that. Somebody spelled the T. You're funny, Chris. So starting off, the first genius is the genius of wonder. So this is Jay's area. He lives in wonder, which the way I describe them, because wonder is one of my frustrations, people with the genius of wonder live at like the 30,000 feet level. They have the ability to see big picture what's going on. They love to ponder and think and just consider the things of the world. They probably ask questions like, why do we do it like this? What if, or why is that the way it is? And they have a tendency to just ask a lot of questions. I worked with somebody recently and they were like, I ask a lot of questions. It's just because I wonder. It's not because I'm arguing, which was a great differentiation for somebody who asks a lot of questions. The next genius is the genius of invention. Inventors love to create. We love to take an idea or even just a blank piece of paper and come up with something new. Inventors take the questions that the wonderer asks and offer new ideas and solutions or whatever it is that they can come up with. They are disruptive in the way that they're like, hey, what if we did this? It's probably one of the most observable geniuses because they're the people that are like, how about this idea? Or what about this? That you have really high energy that comes in spurts. They'll get excited about things and go off and do it. Next is the genius of discernment. So this is where our guy Dale comes in. Discerners are really important because they have really great gut feel and intuition. For discernment people, it's more about that gut feel and intuition versus data. So they respond to the ideas of the inventor and are able to come in after them and be like, I think you're on the right track, but maybe we need to think about this a little bit further. Or, hey, I really think that's a harebrained idea. Maybe you need to go back to the drawing board. So there's this important thing that happens between inventors and discerners that we call the ID loop or invention discernment loop that ensures that there's no harebrained ideas from the really excited inventor getting pushed through the work process. After discernment happens, next comes galvanizing. Here's where Kyle shines. So galvanizers love to get people rallied. They have the unique ability to get everybody on the same page and knock down barriers. If you've ever been in a situation where you were at like an update meeting and then you found out that 2 people were working on the same task and didn't know it, you probably had a gap of galvanizing because the galvanizer helps make sure that everybody's on the same page and work isn't being duplicated. They're sometimes referred to as cheerleaders, which yes, they are, but they also just have that unique ability to move people out of their comfort zone and accomplish something for the good of the team. Next, after galvanizing comes enablement, which is my number one genius. People with a genius of enablement love to help people, but it's about more than just helping. We have the unique ability to anticipate what's needed and then provide it in the way that it's wanted and desired. So we come alongside somebody and provide that assistance to help get things done. And then finally is the genius of tenacity, which none of us have in our top two, but people with tenacity love to get things done. They cross things off the list. They break through barriers. If there's any challenges that come up, they will work tirelessly until they can get it done. So yes, that those are the geniuses. It does spell widget: wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. So did I miss anything, or what did I leave out?
So as a galvanizer, I will say that one of the favorite things I've heard on Table Group's podcasts on this is galvanizers tend to change people's to-do lists, right? Because you're always working on something, and a galvanizer comes along and says, here's the new idea from the discerning process. We've made a decision, right? That point of decision right in the middle of widget is really critical. The galvanizer picks it up and changes people's to-do list. So it's just a little fun little nugget that I think makes a lot of sense.
Very good. I have a friend of mine who she shared with me last summer when we were visiting, that she was at their school. She works at another technology center. She was at their all staff in service, so about 115-ish people. And she said, "How many of you have I talked into doing something you didn't want to do?" And everybody raised their hand. And I was like, "Oh, girl, you are a galvanizer." And sure enough, she took the assessment and she is. So they can move people out of their comfort zone to do things. I love galvanizers. It is my very lowest genius. So
yeah, it as a frustration of mine. It's interesting to see it. I tend to I don't know, whenever I ask people to do something, I have a hard time like feeling like I'm like I either have to convince them or I'm begging them, or even if it's something that's going to be good for them and good for everybody, like I have this weird thing where I feel like they're doing me a favor. So with wonder and invention, then because I draw on that, I want to convince them, right? Like, have you thought about the possibilities of what it could be? Let's look at the solutions, and I want them to get there. So I love learning this and then working with people like Kyle and Dale to just see it naturally happen. And then like we were talking about guilt and shame too, then I don't have to feel bad, right? Like I recognize I don't need to, I should improve, but I don't need to. I need to work with people who have this, who can galvanize me and who can take on the things that I can't do. Cause it's just weird to me. Like it's just my brain doesn't compute galvanizing. It just doesn't.
Right. I'm totally there with you. So do one of you want to explain the differences between geniuses, competencies, and frustrations?
Yeah, I will. I mean, I just talked, but I just like the way Lencioni does it, right? So you think about joy and productivity and energy, right? So these aren't necessarily even things that we're good at. It can be. And it's not even necessarily exactly personality types, right? So we talked about there not being much of a correlation with like Myers-Briggs or DISC or other things. So it's very unique in that it's about productivity and energy. And so you think about your geniuses, the way Patrick Lencioni puts it is that you think about like a thermos, right? And you fill the thermos with coffee and you put the lid on, and the thermos will hold it. It'll keep the heat and keep it going. You can come back to it 2-3 hours later and it's still hot. Those are your geniuses, right? So that represents your genius. And then your competencies. So we all have two geniuses. We all have two competencies. We all have two frustrations. Your two competencies are like the same thermos with the lid off. You can do that for a while and it can maintain its heat for a while. It's still a thermos. It's still doing its job. But with the lid off, the contents are going to cool down pretty quick, and you're going to burn out, right? So that's what we relate to burnout, or just getting eventually frustrated eventually there. And it's kind of a trap too, because we tend to be good at our competencies. And then the frustrations are the exact same mug with the hole drilled out the bottom, right?
Mhm.
You're just when you work in those things, and you need to sometimes, because we have jobs to do and we have to get things done, and we can't just work on our geniuses. But when you do that, it is going to very quickly sap you of joy and energy.
I think one of the most important things that we always get pushback on is, well, that's not my genius, or
Mhm.
um, I don't believe the assessment's correct, or things like that. And it's like, no, we all have to work in our frustrations and our competencies and our geniuses. And you can be really good at working in your frustrations, right? For those of us without tenacity, you had to pass how many tests to get out of school, whether high school, college, you
Mhm.
name it. Your performance reviews every year, all that, you had to grasp tenacity. You might not have liked it. And that's what I think this assessment shows. The thing I'll procrastinate on the most is dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And I'll do it right before it's due.
Mhm.
That is my life in tenacity.
Yep. I remember one of the things I can't remember if it came out of the podcast or the certification training, but your frustrations are the areas where you tend to or are willing to cut corners.
Mm,
And that really resonated with me because it's like,
yeah.
oh, is somebody who, maintains that professionalism and ethical boundaries and everything. I'm like, I don't like to think of myself as cutting corners, but when it comes to wonder and galvanizing, probably.
Or underestimate the amount of work that's required
Mhm.
to do that task, which is then leads you to not appreciate the people who can do it until you have that language to discuss it with.
Right, exactly. So, Kyle, do you want to talk a little bit about how our geniuses are a ranking and not a rating?
Yeah, it's really important because as I talk to individuals, I mean, even my previous people leader, we wanted to assess everybody so we can see who's the best and why, and then how could we replicate that system. And the most important thing for the conversation for us to have is that we need all of these geniuses to make this move forward. I think it's a big problem in corporate America, but that's for a different live stream. But in terms of a ranking versus a rating, we're just strictly trying to find what brings you the most joy and energy at work. Like what brings you the most
Mhm.
satisfaction? What makes you want to get out of your bed and do your job? What do you get excited about? And that's really important to know because, like we've heard from others here, you can be great at your frustrations. I know people that have gotten a lot of promotions on competencies, even on their frustrations at time. And guess what? They don't want to work there anymore, or they're too tired and they're getting burnt out. And so you can be great at all these. It's just when we talk about a genius, we're talking about energy, we're talking about fulfillment, we're talking about satisfaction to where you could go and do it. And one of the items in which we're trying to assess while we're going through this is can we actually get our employees to work more and longer happier with this. And so it's not necessarily where if you're a leader listening to this right now, we're not saying hey, use this tool so you can make your employees work more, but they might naturally work more. You've seen those employees work where
Mhm.
they have a project where they love it and you're like hey, it's Saturday morning, like get off your computer, go spend time with your family. You're like I can't, I love it, I love doing this, I'm excited about it, right? And that's what we're looking for. And that's what makes this a ranking over a rating. And so focus on that, focus on where you can find energy. And that's what I love about this tool. Because I know as a gift of enablement, I naturally want to help somebody cross the finish line.
Mhm.
Like I want to see them be happy. I want them to find joy. That's how I respond. That's one of my, I crave that. If I give somebody, I positively help them as the gift of enablement. If I go and help them cross the finish line, I'm like, yes, it gets me excited. Where there's others that are frustrated by that, and they're like, they're coming and they ask me for help again. I don't really want to, and it's okay. It's okay here.
Mhm.
Like, have we ever been able to say that before in the workplace where you're like, I don't really want to help somebody, right? If we know this language, though, doesn't mean that we can't do it, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And we do have to do it in certain scenarios, but we then find out when we map a team, maybe I reach out to somebody that has an E as their genius instead of somebody that might have an eye, because Pat talks about it all the time. He just wants to create a solution and move on from it. He doesn't really want to help a whole lot. And it's okay for him to say that. He helps millions, billions, I don't know, what's the number of people every year at
Wow.
this point. I mean, and he doesn't have that as something that fulfills him with enablement. In fact, it frustrates him. So again, rating, not a ranking. It's really, really important to know with this.
Yeah. And I just want to piggyback on what you said about helping people. Each genius has the ability to help, just like you said with Pat, he wants to help through the lens of his genius.
Yeah.
And so depending on what your top 2 geniuses are, how you prefer to help is going to look differently. It doesn't mean that you don't want to help or can't. There's one other thing I wanted to say when you talk about ranking, because this has come up in several of the trainings that I do, and I know this from myself. When you think about your geniuses in order of 1 through 6, from genius to frustration, it's not, at least for me, it's not an even distribution between those geniuses. So like I'd say my top 3, enablement, invention, and tenacity, are all pretty close. And then my 3rd competency or my 2nd competency is a little bit lower. And then my frustrations are like way, way down there. And so there are some people that their geniuses and competencies and frustrations may be closer than others. And that's okay too.
For sure.
I hope that made sense. So Denise has a question about sharing more of the value of using a certified facilitator to help you or your team. Kyle, you want to take that one?
I do. And so this one really resonates with me because, like I said earlier, I was a junkie for this for about a year before I became facilitated. I started implementing this with my team before I was a qualified facilitator. And I can tell you that as much as I loved it, listening to it, reading the book, following all the extras, I wound up looking at this model incorrectly. And the reason for that is that I was just trying to take a different model. We didn't have all the resources. We didn't have all the data behind it. We didn't have the different knowledge or the group. Like there's a few thousand facilitators now at this point, and that's how we all came here and met, right? So we can share stories, build off of each other, and support each other. And as a qualified facilitator now, like I am so much more well equipped, instead of just pulling out nuggets that I heard on the webcast and said, well, Pat said this, so must be right then. Well, now I've had the opportunity to actually go in and facilitate a few. I've had the opportunity to go in and be built up by others to bring it in a way in which it can be more impactful and help get those individuals to the finish line without kind of telling them, well, the math makes sense, just follow it.
Yeah, I'll add a couple things to that too. For me, there's a couple of very clear reasons to work with a certified facilitator. The first is oftentimes we get blinded by being too close to things. And so even if you have read the book and are pretty versed with a lot of the table groups information, the Six Working Geniuses, having somebody be able to come in from a fresh perspective and have those conversations with you to really help align your team is invaluable. And then second, for me, they're like personally, one of the big things I took from going through the facilitation, the process, for instance, and Julia mentioned it earlier, but talking about the elevations and understanding the difference between like the elevations and then the correlation with meetings, as well as joy and energy and productivity in our tasks. So having somebody who sees the whole picture and can come in and align your team on multiple levels is going to drive a lot more value than, again, kind of you trying to work through it with the blindfold of being too close. So.
Excellent. And so, Jay, you mentioned the concept of elevation. So, Dale, I want to kick that one to you. Do you want to talk about that concept of elevation or altitude and how Widget works into that and how that can help help our teams?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So if you take Widget from left to right and you make the W at the top, Now you're flying on a plane that's at 30,000 feet. And oftentimes, if you're not paying attention, this is what happens in meetings. My first client actually had the genius of invention and the genius of tenacity. So if you were in a meeting with him and he was a CEO, he would start out with his ideas from the past weekend, and then he would dive down into the SEO for the marketing team. And then he'd come back up, and I've got another idea for this. And if you can picture yourself on a plane and you're going from invention to tenacity and back to invention, you get airsick, right? And so when we talk about the elevation of these geniuses, there is a very specific process you should follow when you're trying to land a plane, weather aside, right? You're starting at 30,000 feet and you're coming down through invention. Discernment is where you pick the best idea. Galvanizing gets people going towards implementation. Enablement and tenacity bring the plane down to land. And if you're not careful, you can very easily go from one elevation to another elevation. And that's why we think the language is so critical to just having words to describe where are we in this meeting, what genius is called for right now, or Pat will split those into 3 phases of work. And are we in the implementation phase of work? That is not the time to ask a wonder question, that those people will want to kill you. So
I learned that the hard way.
Yes. Yes. And that's one of the things I love about Working Genius. And he talks about this in the videos and the materials and things, but the increased self-awareness that we get through knowing our geniuses is huge, because just like Dale was talking about, the altitude or elevation, we have the tendency to pull the conversation to where we feel most comfortable. And so it's important to have that awareness of where you do feel comfortable so that you can regulate it when needed. Because if I'm in a meeting where we are brainstorming, it's like a WI meeting, I'm an EI, but my T is real strong too. And so I will have a tendency to pull the conversation down to that 5 to 10,000 foot level where I'm most comfortable. Knowing we're in that 25 to 30,000 foot level meeting, I can sit on my hands and kind of rein that in a little bit. Likewise, like Dale said, if we're in an ET meeting where we're getting things done, we're kicking things off tomorrow, that is not the time for somebody to go, oh, what if we added this brand new idea? It really is that concept of turbulence. Every training that I've been in, when I describe it, everybody's like, oh my gosh, yes, I've experienced that. And the Working Genius language really helps combat that.
And we always talk about that as regulating your genius. So from a vernacular standpoint, I mean, knowing when to use your genius and when to sit on your hands, as Julie said, is really, really important. And it's one of the key benefits of just having a language to describe where you are in the process of implementing a project.
Absolutely. Dale, you mentioned the 3 phases of work, but didn't go into that deeper. Do you want to explain those 3 phases?
If I can remember the exact the order, if you take WI first, that's the ideation phase or innovation phase. I'll just use some I word because my tenacity doesn't really care about that. But
You have it right. It's ideation.
Ideation is good.
You take that those 2 geniuses and take a brainstorming meeting, right? I always say wonder helps you set up the sandbox for the invention and what's inbounds and what's out of bounds. And then you come up with a bunch of ideas. And then you have to move into the activation phase, discernment and galvanizing. And Pat has a great story about this that I won't go into, but if you don't have people that can choose the right idea and then actually move it forward, that's just a recipe for, we've got all these great ideas, Jay, right? Why aren't we getting them done? Because you don't have the people in the middle to say, this is a really good one. And, oh, by the way, I'm willing to step up and change people's to-do lists and get people moving in a new direction. And then so you've got ideation, activation. The last phase is implementation. And that is the one of my clients has a lot of ETs, and that's what they do. They constantly implement, and they hired a W. And when the W doesn't know that, they come in, they look at what's being implemented, and they ask the question, can't you do this in a better way? Or I thought about doing it this way. Wouldn't that help you out? And of course, that doesn't go over very well, and it causes a lot of headbutting and conflict on the team. It's unhealthy. So understanding now, having a language allows them to not get into those types of discussions.
Absolutely. I want to share a little bit of story that kind of relates to that as well, especially with the common language. But once you understand the 6 types of working genius and can use really those geniuses as a verb, I have noticed, especially with people who are inventors, they can say, all right, no, I'm just inventing here. I'm not asking you to do something, which is really important for people with the genius of enablement, because immediately I want to be like, how can I help? How can I help? And there's a story about this big keynote speaker, and I can't even remember who it is, and it doesn't really matter. But he was planning his next big event, and he said, what if we brought a tiger on stage? And somebody in the room wrote down, wants to bring a tiger on stage. And the meeting just kept rolling, and they wrapped it up. Nothing else was said. A couple weeks later, they come back, and this person raises her hand, and she goes, I've done the research, and these are the companies we can rent a tiger from, and this is how much it's going to cost, and this is the insurance we have to have in place. And he was like, I didn't actually need you to do that. Like, I was just throwing ideas out there. So in that situation, if they'd have had this language, he could have said, now I'm just inventing. I'm not needing you to do anything. Or she could have said, are you asking me to do this? Or are you just throwing ideas at the wall, just inventing? And they could have, avoided some time, energy, and probably a little bit of embarrassment on both parties' parts. So do any of you guys have a story like that you like to share in training?
My father-in-law is a really good example. It's been really telling for me because we'll be sitting on the back porch, drinking beverage of choice, and he'll just be looking at the landscape. He'll be wondering about the greater possibility, but he's a T. So all of a sudden we're sitting there, we're having a good time, and then he gets up and starts going. I'm like, what just happened? Like, why? What? He just wants to figure out if his idea would work. Like, is there a greater possibility? Can we do it? And he used to make me feel very insecure. Like I didn't really want to go do that right now. Like I wasn't really worried about that. Is there something wrong with my yard? Was there something that made me really defensive? Because it's one of my working frustrations, that wonder. So as a son-in-law, I had to fight through that. But now that I have that language, it really helps me to understand, like, hey, he's just living in this and enjoying it. Like we're having a good time. He's wondering about the greater possibilities. And if I need to go get something done, boom, we can do it. But now I know that I have to rein him in at different times. I'm being like, well, let's keep this airplane just flying high and let's cruise here for a little bit before we go and take that project on.
Right.
I mean, that sounds turbulent, right? Like you said,
it is.
I mean, if he's operating at 30,000 and immediately to 5, then working around that, having that language and being able to communicate that, like how valuable is that compared to not understanding or being frustrated or going through the turbulence.
Yeah. One other story. So I was working with a teacher group, and one of them had the gift of wonder, and the other one had discernment and enablement. And as we were talking through it, like when I first walked in, I said, so what do you think about this assessment? And she said, it's like astrology. I'll use some things. And I thought, okay, so she's not bought in already. Like that was the first thing out of her mouth. And by the end, when we got there, a really good note is that if we skip letters, if we skip geniuses, we skip people. What this story tells me is that she looked at her coworker right next to her and said, when you don't give me the opportunity to wonder, I feel useless to this team. And it was a really quiet moment for the team. Like it was vulnerability. Everybody sat there and they're like, thank you so much for telling me that. Like I didn't want to waste your time. Like I had that thought, and she's like, no, I need to be needed. I don't feel like I'm helping this group when you don't let me sit and wonder. And I know it takes me a long time, but I love it. Like I love sitting in it and having that opportunity to do it. And so one person thought they were helping by taking that burden off of them, right? But really what they were doing is taking joy out of the job. And so now as they move forward, they know that they can sit back and get it over to this individual, and they'll ponder it, come back with it. And they know that they feel needed now. They feel that brings them joy to the job. And so it's really important with those conversations That's what I love about this tool. It creates a lot of vulnerability and teamwork. Like, this is an inclusion culture that we're in right now, right? I don't know if there's a more inclusive tool out there for recognizing and elevating everybody's big gifts, everybody's wants and needs within the workplace in a society where we're burnout, overworked, and just chasing the dollar, when we could be looking at this differently and probably making more dollars by working within our geniuses within our jobs. We don't have to change our jobs necessarily. We just have to restructure what we do. So that's definitely one of my aha moments of my opportunities of facilitating.
Very good. Two things before I lose it. You mentioned, we don't have to change our jobs, but understanding them helps. Another thing that I say a lot in my trainings, I'm sure you guys too, is every job is a 6-letter job.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we have our geniuses where we prefer to work and get the most energy and joy out of, but we're adults and we're going to have to do work that falls outside of our geniuses. And we can, and we should, obviously. But even just knowing, all right, this is not my genius work. I can do it. I don't have to live here, really helps me get through some of those activities that are like, I'd rather eat hot coals than do this.
Yeah.
I want to interject
go ahead
real quick, because it just made me think about it. So one of the things that I really liked when I first found this is kind of like exactly what you're saying, right? So if my genius is wonder and invention, and somebody who that may be their frustrations needs to do that, right? Then I have a couple choices. If I don't know the tool and I don't know how this works, then I can look at them and be like, well, they didn't do a very good job of that. I live in this all the time. That's why, right? Where if I know that those are their frustrations, then I could say, you know what, you stepped out of your comfort zone, you stepped into your frustrations, and you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. Maybe as a wonder and invention, it's not exactly how I would have done it if that's the world I live in. But I'm going to recognize that you got out of your comfort zone. You did something that you needed to do. You got it done, and that's incredible. So it changes everything, how we relate to each other, how we appreciate everybody at work and understand what they're doing and how they're doing. And when they do something that is out of their frustration, don't necessarily judge the quality, right? Celebrate the win that they did something that they believe the team needed. That it was hard for them to do, and they stepped up.
Awesome. And that is the perfect segue into what we're going to talk about next. So Kyle mentioned it, that when the person with wonder said, when you don't allow me to wonder, I feel useless. I don't feel valued. So within the 6 types of working genius, there's this concept of crave and crush. So every genius has something that they crave more of. And on the other side of that coin, that something is just crushing. So since we all basically, like Kyle and I overlap with enablement, and Jay and I overlap with invention. So I want Jay to go first, because we'll get through widget here, and talk about, for wonder and invention, what your craves and crushes are. And then we'll go to Dale, and then Kyle, and then I'll take the last one.
Well, being on the spot, this is something that I need to learn a lot more about. The craves and the crushes. Every time I read it, I think, yeah, that's exactly right. But I'll need somebody else to fill in for me.
So wonder craves consideration. They want to know that the questions that they're asking are like valued. They're like, oh, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. And the flip side of that is being dismissed, or be like, I don't care. Why don't we care about that? Or we don't have time to think about that right now.
Yeah.
So.
Little PTSD there. Yeah. That's pretty much nailed it.
I can see that. If you've been crushed, I can see that. Yeah. I want to interject one more thing about wonder real quick. This came up in a training I did with a church team a couple weeks ago, where the leader of the team was experienced, older. I don't have any idea how old he was, but there was 2 people on his team who had the genius of wonder, and they were like early 20s. And once we went through this crave crush part, he was like, oh, I guess I need to give them the time to wonder and not just dismiss them because they haven't paid their dues. And I was like, it was a huge light bulb moment for him. So I love that.
I love that too.
All right, Dale, you're next.
So, discernment, what people with the discernment, people come to me and ask me for advice, right? People with discernment, they're often sought out, and it's not because they're an expert in a specific field, but because they use intuition, gut feel a lot, and they can tell. They recognize patterns, things they've seen in other places. They synthesize what that idea really means in the context of work. Um, so if you come to me and ask me for my opinion on something and I give it to you and you blow me off or you tell me to prove it, like I'm done with you. Talk to the hand,
Yeah.
because that will shut me down quicker than anything. So what we're looking for, we crave people to trust our response. And if you totally blow us off or ask us to prove it, especially when you take, in my case, tenacity is my lowest thing. It's like, that's the last thing I want to do is try to prove it to you. I have no time for you.
Point.
And then to go into galvanizing, what galvanizers crave is a reaction, right? If you wanna just totally let the air out of my tires, just sit there with a blank stare on your face. So I'm glad I can't see the audience out here, but if you didn't react, if I'm up there galvanizing, and I tell all the clients I have that when I'm training this, like, I'm galvanizing you right now to believe that Working Genius is the best thing that you could possibly invest in. So I said, I'm galvanizing away. And if you sat there with just a stone face, right, and didn't argue with me, I don't care if you believe in what I'm telling you or not, tell me I'm crazy, but react, right? We crave reaction, and we will be crushed by people that don't react or give us the, deadpan face.
Yeah, good or bad, kind of wrestle with it, right? Like
Right.
I as a galvanizer, I'd rather be like, no, I'm not going to do that, and it's almost it's not a challenge to win, but then it challenges me to speak different way of belief into it because it's already been vetted. We already went through ideation. We're into the activation, discernment, forecasted what's going to happen, and we've predicted the weather to come. And so now I'm ready to speak this belief into you. So let's go, people. If you don't understand it, then please get me some feedback so I can try it again. And I'm going to keep trying it until we get there. And then that goes right into my next one. My geniuses, much like Dale's, are right next to each other. And so that flows into enablement. So after I rally the troops, I'm like, all right, well, let's go do this. How can I help?
Yeah.
And I think enablement, the superpower of enablement is the power of the flex. As a people leader, while I was working on big spreadsheets, as I was working on my T work in the morning, when I get that phone call, I'd be like, oh, thank goodness. Like I want to be able to help my teammate. I'm like, please give me some kind of situation where I can go, and I would reach out to other people, and I'd bring people in. That's part of my galvanizing, but then it was also part of my enablement to get them to want to work. So as an enabler, with a gift of enablement, it's positivity, it's the power to flex, to get into that. And with those, it's really nice to see. It's really nice to have somebody on the team to do it, because they're not necessarily worried about just getting it done. They're not worried about how it's going to get done. They just want to help get it done. And they're probably going to be like a jack of all trades. They're just going to help wherever they can help and do the best that they can. And they're going to be happy about it as long as it's moving forward. They do want forward progress. And that's something that I feel and I see with enablement. But yeah, if I help you and it doesn't bring you joy, that is something that actually crushes me a lot with the gift of enablement. If I can't get you to feel positive about next steps by trying to help you to take you to the finish line, that can be really defeating, because a lot of times we have to do work in other areas that we don't necessarily like. It winds up being a lot of T work in enablement, I found. And that's right there on the frustration, lowest competency for me on that side of it. So I feel you, Dale.
Yep. I want to add on to enablement, like as far as like the straight crave and crush go. People with a genius of enablement crave appreciation.
Yeah.
Like, and I go so far as to say like acknowledgement, not necessarily recognition, because they're different. And if you're familiar with the 5 love languages, there are also 5 languages of appreciation. And so those can be nuanced as far as what people with a genius of enablement crave as far as that appreciation goes. For me, is just like acknowledgement. Hey, I see what you did there. I appreciate it. You send me a little note that's like handwritten, and I will like jump up and down, like, how can I help you again? Like, it's crazy. And the flip side of that is we're crushed by being overlooked, or I say forgotten. If you feel like, what does it even matter what I do? Like, that is the most defeating thing for me. And then to round it out with tenacity, this is my number 3, I'd say, but also very high. Tenacity craves clarity. We want to know what good looks like, what success looks like, what is the freaking deadline, so that we know what we are working towards and we can knock everything down to get it. People with tenacity are crushed by ambiguity. So, and everybody that I've talked to that has tenacity, I say, if I give you a project and I said, here is something to do, however you want to do it, whatever you want to do, whenever it's done is fine. They're like, no, give me some parameters and give me a deadline.
Structure.
So, yes, structure. So they crave clarity, permission to finish, what done looks like. And the other thing I want to say with each of these craves and crushes is, yes, they hold true for our geniuses, but they hold true whether it's a competency or frustration. And when we're working outside of our geniuses, these craves and crushes are amplified even more. Because like Jay said, if you know somebody is working in their frustration, acknowledge that, because they're already having to dig so deep and work so much harder that those craves and crushes become that much more important.
Yep.
So we're under the 10-minute mark. What else do we need to cover?
Before I run out of time, there's something I've been thinking about. So I was reading over the weekend, a little bit last week, and I was like, I can't wait for Monday to kind of share this with whoever's watching and with this group. So if anybody in this group and some people who know me, I'm very kind of going headlong into a lot of AI stuff and immersing myself in learning. So one of the things, reports just came out. So right now, about 30% of people are using AI at work. 88% of them are non-technical people, and the vast majority of them crave human-centric experience, right? More than people who don't use AI. And I think as more people use AI, the idea of having a human-centric workplace is going to become more important, more valuable for the employee and the employer as we kind of shift into new technologies. And so there's no better tool. I could not think of a single better tool than to make a human-centric workplace than the 6 types of working genius. So there's to me, like I have goosebumps right now thinking about the synergy between AI and where we're going and productivity and those sorts of things, and then combining that with the 6 types of working genius and really focusing on creating human-centric workplaces.
Very good. And I think that's a pretty good segue into one of the topics that we haven't talked about that Working Genius can really help with. It's this concept of team maps, and how when you know everybody's genius on your team, you can really look at it in a visual way and see where you have, maybe stacked strengths or geniuses and where you might have gaps. So Dale, I think you've probably worked with more teams than all of us combined. So why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I think the team map is one of those aha moments, right? When you look at where you have clusters of geniuses, or sometimes more importantly, clusters of frustrations, because it's very easy to when you underestimate the work that's required in something that frustrates you, or you procrastinate on doing it, and then you get 3 or 4 people on your team that share that frustration, the probability that you're actually going to do that work is really, really low. And that's why, when the earlier question, why a certified facilitator, because we come in and I have commented on more team maps in the community of facilitators than I've facilitated groups, right? But they're always interesting. And what are the things you're looking for? You're looking for groups of geniuses, so that you might spend too much time in a certain area, or groups of frustrations that you might avoid, or you already mentioned having gaps. If we have a strong WI and I've got no discernment, then I'm likely to pick things that, it's roll the dice if they actually work when they get into production. If I don't have a galvanizer, then things don't start. If I don't have people that want to help with the genius of enablement, then the galvanizer gets frustrated and the tenacity people are waiting for something to do. So you can start to think about the team that you live in today and think about, okay, why do we have this issue? Oh, I bet we don't have the genius of this, or man, we never go there. We don't ask. And Pat's got a famous conversation where they had an executive team of a tech company that found out that the only person on that team that had the genius of wonder or invention was the corporate lawyer. And a year and a half later, he's now running R&D. So, I mean, things do happen, but that was an astute observation that when they had the assessment, they saw the team map, they could actually take the right action and deal with it.
Very good. One other thing I want to comment on team maps is, initially, this is probably our default, is we want a very balanced team map. You want geniuses in each of the different areas and your frustrations distributed evenly as well. Well, I ran into a situation the other day where everybody on this team was an ET. And, my knee-jerk reaction was,
Wow.
oh, crap. But it turned out the function of this team was to get things done and allow other people to get things done. The function of that team was not to wonder and invent or discern or galvanize. And so for that team's purpose, for everybody having an ET, it was actually quite good. And so if you look at a team map and you're like, oh my gosh, we don't have any wonder and invention, like, is that detrimental to your team? Are you required to ask big picture questions and to innovate? If not, then it may not be as big of a gap or red flag as you initially think. What do you guys think on that?
How's the morale on that team, Julie, in terms of, so everybody's working within their geniuses on doing their work? Is that something where they show up and actually, how did they feel about that?
It was a non-conventional, like, functional team. It was actually like a board. And so it was like a ancillary thing that they did outside of their regular work. But for this purpose that they served on that board, it was very good.
I would be concerned any team that was overloaded with ETs they would typically say, we've always done it this way, right? The little reluctance to change would be my gut telling me that that's what I'd have to poke at to see, because eventually, you can run a process or be in implementation mode for quite a while. And at some point, somebody has to ask Jay to get involved and, like, why are we doing it this way, right? Can't we use AI today to make that process better or something like that, so that you're not just always doing the same thing day in, day out. And the next thing you know, the market goes left and you're still going right.
Right, exactly. So we are bumping up against time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I think we're going to do these on a more regular basis, because I think this was pretty fun. So if there's any questions that you guys had that you didn't pop in the comments, pop them in there later, and we'll get to them on the next time. So real quick, like 10 seconds, why don't you tell our audience who should connect with you or who you like to work with? And then if you haven't seen it as it's popped up, if you go to workinggenius.com or .phonesites.com, it can get to all of our LinkedIn profiles and you can connect with us from there. So Dale, real quick, who needs to connect with you?
I like working with teams that really want to invest in their organization, even teams that think they're running well, right? Because they can always get better. They want a new perspective.
Very good. Kyle.
Small business owners, you don't have enough people. You need this tool because you got to be more productive, more functional than most. You can't waste time. And if you have a bunch of views there, you're going to become the next blockbuster. This is really important that you use this tool to succeed.
Good. Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll combine the two. So small businesses and teams. Anybody who's interested in using AI and improving teamwork and competitive strategy, 10xsolutions.ai. I published it this weekend, so it's just starting. And I'll just a little plug. So the first thing I'm doing on there is a questionnaire. So anybody can go on the questionnaire, and then I'm offering a free 2-page thing on how to do it, how to implement AI. And I'm trying to be short, and it's taking me too long. So use the questionnaire, go on there, test it, because then I'm just launching this, so I want to be able to get some questions, get to testing, and start helping people.
Very good. And for me, if you're located in northeast Oklahoma-ish, north central Oklahoma in the Meridians district, let me know, or even outside of the district, but all things Working Genius. So thank you guys very much for being here. Thank you guys for watching.
Pleasure.
According to LinkedIn, we've had at least 20 to 30 people on the entire time, so that is super exciting.
Awesome.
Hang tight. We'll hit the outro and stay tuned. We'll probably have another one of these scheduled sometime soon. So thank you guys for being here. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
See ya.